and welcome back to another episode of The Jake Williams Show. I am, of course, your host, Jake Williams, episode 36. Now, it's just going to be me this week, no guests, but I will say last week's episode was a lot of fun, and if you haven't checked it out, please do. A good friend of mine, Ramsey Assam, I always want to say Assam, but it's Assam. He was on the show talking about his business, Sacrilegious Cider Works, which is actually really funny. It's kind of a serendipitous thing. I knew I was recording today, but I did not intend to wear my Sacrilegious Cider Works t-shirt, but I am. Here we are. I was really happy to do that episode, and I want to do more interviews, more stuff like that. So if you have a business out there or you are an expert in some sort of field and want to come on the show, please do that. You can reach me at jakewilliams5150@gmail.com. You can send me an email there. Or you can also send an email to beloud@loudandopinionated.com, and we'll see what we can do. See if I can get you on the show. I'd love to have you. But that's beside the point. Enough about other people. Let's just hang out with me this week. Episode 36 is going to be something different. Because I kind of did this back in March for Zack Snyder's Watchmen. That turned 10 this year. Now, this movie, I think, is a lot more impactful than that movie. No disrespect to Zack Snyder's Watchmen. I'm one of the few people that actually like it. But the movie that I'm talking about today is something that when it came out, when it came and hit theaters and people saw it, it was something unpredictable. It was something they didn't see before. And it changed genres and it mixed genres and it kind of changed action movies forever, in my opinion, and not only mine, but a lot of people. Today we're talking about the legacy of The Matrix. I mean, I hate to be that guy, but it really does put in perspective how old I feel. Because when this movie came out initially, I was 5 years old. I am now 25 years old, almost 26. It's kind of weird. And I remember vividly when it first came out on, DVD. I think probably VHS was still around. Yeah, VHS, home video, as they used to call it. When that came out, I remember going and watching it at my grandma's, without her knowing, on HBO. And I remember seeing that movie at a young age and not really understanding it. I mean, as I said, I was 5, almost 6 years old. Well, probably at the time I had seen it, I was 6. I don't know what any of this stuff means. I don't know any of the philosophical stuff. I just thought it looked really cool. I also never understood why it got an R rating. It's not a movie that I think really warrants an R rating, but that's a whole different discussion for a different day, I guess. But yeah, this is a movie that I fell in love with at a young age. And as I got older, I started to respect it more and like it in a different way. And to me, that's a sign of a really good movie. If you can watch it at one point in your life and enjoy it, and then watch it at another point in your life and get something else out of it entirely, that's a sign of a good movie. And The Matrix, now the sequels, and trust me, we'll get into the sequels because I recently just watched, actually I think a week ago I just watched The Matrix Reloaded again. And that was a movie that's different than this because in The Matrix Reloaded, when I saw it as a kid, I was 10 years old. I thought it was the coolest shit ever. I was super excited, and all the Smith stuff, when he's fighting all the Smiths, all that stuff, all the set pieces and everything to it, I really enjoyed. And then we get to the philosophical stuff, and I hated it because I was a kid, and I was like, just get back to the punchy stuff. Why are we talking? What's the architect? Why are there all these TV screens? All that stuff went over my head. As I got older, I still didn't like it. And to me, that shows the beauty of the first movie, whereas I'm older, it's still a really good movie. And don't get me wrong, much like Matrix Reloaded, some of the special effects really don't hold up at all. I'll fully acknowledge that. But I think overall, the message and the storytelling and the overall just feel of the movie is timeless. Now, again, the special effects, some of the things they're trying to do in the movie absolutely are going to feel dated. The movie was made 20 years ago. But the idea of what is human, what is reality, who controls you, it's all like all these movies have the same theme of that is what is your perception of reality? Who is running reality? Who is controlling you? You know, all these sort of deep philosophical questions. And it's a timeless idea because we are always asking these questions. So we're always having these philosophical conversations about who is our master, who is in control of our reality, and things like that. This was the first time where we had seen it with computers and tech and had like this weird, I don't want to like cyberpunk. I was going to say steampunk, but cyberpunk approach to it. I mean, when it came out, people were losing their minds. They're like, "Whoa, what is this? What could this mean? What is all these other things?" So, you've seen the movie. So I'm not gonna like do a full review. And if you haven't seen the movie, uh, do yourself a favor and watch it. Now I know if you're probably a younger listener, you're probably thinking like, why would I want to watch this movie from 20 years ago? People make fun of it and blah blah blah. I'm telling you, it's worth your time. It is a very good sci-fi flick, and it's gonna make you truly question your own reality, and it's gonna make you question certain things in your life. And maybe you weren't ready for that, but I think these are the questions that you need to ask. And I can't give it a higher praise than that. I mean, the biggest example of not realizing how much I really loved this movie, I had sat down to watch it because I had wanted to do this episode because I like doing the Watchmen one so much, and I was like thinking of other things that an anniversary would be coming around, and I could do an analysis of it and do explain why I love it so much, even now. And it was so funny because having Ashley watch it and not really seeing it, she had seen bits and parts of it. I don't think enough to get any context of to what the hell is going on, because you really need to watch all, like you need to pay attention because there's some serious plot things. Which, being older and watching it, I think this is the first time I've watched it in quite a while, and it's just something funny that I've noticed while watching it is how much Morpheus is just straight up exposition. Almost all of his dialogue is exposition. But I think that's what's cool about it is because you are Neo in this scenario. In this story, the audience is Neo. You're learning how this world works. You're understanding the rules. They do a lot in world building, and I think, which to the movie's credit says a lot about Lawrence Fishburne, because even though almost all of his dialogue is exposition and explaining everything about the movie, it's still entertaining because he still gives a really great performance. I still love. I mean, yes, it's hammy at times, and he chews a little bit of scenery, but it still works in the context of the movie. It still manages to work, even with this movie. And I'll admit, like especially with the sequels, these movies do get very self-serious. But I don't think it's very much an issue in the first movie because I think the next two movies they kind of the Wachowskis try and show off, and I think the movie hurts because of it. But anyway, Ashley was watching it for the first time, and this also sucks because the movie's been around for so long. Early 2000s, if you wanted a cheap joke in your movie, you put in the slow-mo shot of Neo where he's dodging the bullets, because that was in every comedy, scary movie, Kung Pao, Into the Fist, classic film. Which I feel like that in and of itself is a whole episode of just, I don't even know how the movie got made. But anyway, I digress. There's all sorts of slow-mo jokes, the bullet time stuff. So this had been parody to no end at this point. And that also says a lot about that movie because in the early 2000s, like 1999, early 2000s, everybody was talking about The Matrix. It was a big part of the zeitgeist. And this movie at the time, the sequel, broke the record for box office for an R-rated movie. Of course, since then, it's been beaten by The Passion of the Christ and Deadpool 2. So, I mean, also have to look at how long they held that spot for quite a while. Until, Jesus and superheroes showed up and changed everything for them. So I remember watching it and I was like a kid again. I was super giddy about it because you got to keep in mind, this is the first time I'd watched this movie in a long time. Probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years. No, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I watched it with Derek once, but it was late at night after a night of drinking, and we passed out. He stayed up and watched it. I fell asleep. I couldn't do it. It was there's, as good as that movie is. There are a little bit of slow parts, and there was enough to fall asleep. I somehow managed to wake up at the action scenes, which I seem to do that every time I fall asleep watching a movie. It's like a sixth sense I have. When I know there's going to be punchy action stuff, I know how to wake up. I'm going to tell the story eventually. I keep getting sidetracked because there's just so much to this movie and to the legacy of this movie. But yeah, I was giddy as a kid because I was seeing moments in this movie, and I was thinking back to when I was watching this with my dad when I was a kid, and how even then I knew that this was something I'd never seen before. And my dad loved it just as much as I did. My dad watched it probably as much as I did, and he he further explained it to me, so I kind of picked up on it a little bit. But again, at that age, I didn't really care. I just wanted to see Neo do flips and shoot people and punch them, which also says a lot about his parenting skills. But I love him. He was the best. So I was like, oh man, you don't even know. Like, she was sitting there watching with me, and there's certain set pieces that I know that are coming, and I'm just like, oh, you don't even know. And then something will happen. I'm like, yes. And I would like smile, and I'd laugh, and I'd clap, and it was like I was watching the movie again for the first time. And that, again, to me, speaks to how good this movie is. This movie still has that ability to, even though I've seen it thousands of times, it seems like, I would still get excited. I would still enjoy the movie. And I can't say that with a lot of movies. There are movies out there that I just don't, laugh, care about, or anything like that. But if the movie can legitimately make me giddy like this did, it says a lot. And it also says that, oh, I'm older now, so this is picking up more sense. This is making more sense. These things aren't just cool visuals. I mean, some of it looks like it is on the surface, but there's so much more to what was going on. And I think watching it now and doing this episode has really made me come full circle and really appreciate how awesome that first movie is. Because they went on a limb, they tried something new. I mean, nobody really thought that this would be successful. I mean, on its face value, if you're trying to explain the Matrix to someone, you say, oh yeah, this hacker guy named Neo, which coincidentally is supposed to be the one in this movie, but he gets these random people show up and say that, it's time to see the real world type stuff. And then he takes a pill and he touches this mirror, and then it gets really weird. And then he finds out, oh, I've been this weird incubated man fetus thing that's been controlled by machines because they harvest our energy, because human beings produce a ton of electricity in our bodies, and that's enough to power their machines. See what I'm saying? As I'm saying, it's kind of weird. It's kind of hard to sell people. So it's you can see how it's like baffling that movie was a gigantic box office hit and spawned video games and anime and movie or other movies and comic books. I mean, this turned into a gigantic franchise, and nobody expected that. And to have seen it begin and see it now 20 years later and see what it became, yeah, the other two movies aren't nearly as good, but the first movie is still a great achievement of the 20th century. Right at the end there. Greatest achievement of one of the greater achievements of the 20th century in sci-fi filmmaking. It is truly a marvel to watch. I actually did like it, by the way. And as I was saying, I got giddy about the action sequences because it was those kid moments. But watching it now, understanding how storytelling works, understanding how filmmaking works, I really enjoyed it, I think, even more. Because being someone that likes to consider themselves an adult, I like to pretend I'm an adult. I know that I'm not really an adult. Being someone that sees this and fully understands the story now, it's again shows you how good it really is. Because it's part Alice in Wonderland. I mean, they kind of telegraph that with the White Rabbit, and I'm like, they're going down the rabbit hole, all that stuff. But it is a movie that is Alice in Wonderland at its core. And it is a movie, all it is just this guy. It's almost like, it's kind of a weird way to explain this, but this guy's a truth seeker. That's all this movie is. This guy's just trying to figure it out, figure out life, figure out what is real, what is something that he could latch onto. And, the metaphor just happens to be that we're being harvested by robots. That's really all it is. key thing I want to point out too about this movie, about watching it with Ashley and her not watching it when it came out and watching it now and seeing how far we've advanced with our CGI and technological filmmaking. The first sequence, the one with Trinity, is also another example of people parodying the crap out of this movie and constantly making fun of it and barraging it with jokes. Is the fact that we've seen her do this move where she's fighting the cops and she jumps up in midair and it freezes and she's like in this weird crouching position. We've seen that 100 different times in different comedies. We've seen it 100 different times. So initially, there's a kind of a, smile and a little wink, because I know that she'd seen that in comedies. And then there's a sequence where she like jumps out of the window and like spins in midair to go in this other building and lands. That shot did not look good. I'll admit there are some shots that don't look good, but I also forgive it because it is a 20-year-old movie. But it's scenes in particular that really stuck out to me because I remember them vividly when I watched them, were the big set pieces, was the dojo scene, the firefight in the building, the fight in the subway, the final fight, all that stuff. That third act of that movie is just pure action movie joy. All of that third act of that movie is great. But when the second act, when we see the dojo fight, that's when I noticed Ashley was really getting into it. Because yes, you have the stuff before that kind of explains the whole situation, and she's like, okay, yeah, this makes more sense. Because if you see it out of context, and you see it in bits and chunks, it doesn't really make sense, and you don't really understand it. So that's when she was like, okay, I get where this is coming from. I know what this is doing. But the dojo scene was, I think, the first time where she really was like, oh, this is why Jake likes it so much. This is why people liked it so much, because of how this move, the fight choreography. And I'll hold true to that. I think all three movies, even with the weird Neo Smith fight in the third one, I think that's the whole continuity of all three movies, is the actual like fight choreography is extremely well done and still holds up to this day. And I think that's because, in part, you're not seeing as much hand-to-hand combat as you would before. And I think that's because of technology, because now you have these superhero movies that have a lot of CGI, and there's these characters flying around, these characters throwing planets and all sorts of crazy shit going on. That is easier to do in CGI than with practical. And you're seeing a lot of stuff like that. So it was refreshing to go back to this movie from 1999 that focused on hand-to-hand combat, because it didn't have the money to have this, or the technology to have the spectacle that we have now. So they had to rely on more fight choreography and in-camera work. And I think that is great, and that is to the movie's benefit, because I can only imagine what the Wachowskis would have done if they had the technology they do now when they're making the original trilogy. So I think the time and place of this first movie is important. And I didn't really catch on to this because I was just so into the dojo stuff when I was younger. The movie, as self-serious as I had mentioned they have been, this was a rare case in the movie where the characters going into the fight, there's like a gong sound before the kung fu fight. That's when they're kind of having some fun with it. And you have the iconic line from Morpheus, "Stop trying to hit me and hit me." Things like that. Like, that scene is so freaking rad, dude. I love the dojo scene probably more than any other fight scene in that movie, because you finally get to see Neo play around. Before, with all the stuff with the introduction to the Matrix, I mean, they run the jump test after this, and that's more of this, but we hadn't had a lot of action. We had the set piece in the beginning. We kind of had the action sequences when he's trying to escape his work, and the stuff with his belly button and the tracker and all that stuff. This was where we finally see Neo and Morpheus let loose and have some fun with it and actually have some action. And to me, that's where the movie really picks up, because after that you get the jump animation. Then after that, we're going to go see the Oracle, and then these things continue to just play out, I think, perfectly after that dojo scene. And I'm not saying the stuff before the dojo scene wasn't awesome. I'm just saying that moments after that part are really where the movie went from being okay, this isn't bad, to one of my favorite sci-fi movies. That's The Jump. Now, I don't know. I definitely don't think that's, the jump for Ashley, but I definitely think that's where she started to take notice. Like I mentioned, oh, this is why this was such a big deal. This is why this people like this movie so much. And yeah, that's just the scene that always sticks out to me right away. When I think of The Matrix, some people might be easy to think of, sunglasses and the trench coat and a lot of green looking stuff. But that's what I always remember is the dojo scene. And another prime example is of when I was like, oh, yeah, let's do this. Like getting excited again. Is, Ashley's just sitting there and there's a sequence when they get Morpheus and then Neo's like, I got to go back. And Trinity's like, I'm going with you. And they're going and they get guns. He's like, what do you need? Guns. Lots of guns. I was like, oh, boy. So many memories when it's like, and all the guns on the gun rack. And I'm like, oh, yes, let's do it. Let's see Neo. This is, again, where I was like, finally, we're getting to see Neo fully embrace the Matrix, fully embrace being the hero of this movie. And it's so great. And the fact that majority of that sequence in that building is just bullet time and slow motion. Like, oh my gosh, it's so well done and it's so fun to watch. I mean, I don't think I'm doing enough justice to show you how much I really enjoyed this movie. It's on another level. And there's a reason why it has this legacy, because again, it was something that we had not really seen before. And bullet time, some could argue that John Woo kind of started that. And I don't know. I don't really know the whole, logistics of all this, but it was definitely the Wachowskis that made it a really cool mechanic and made people like it and use it. I mean, to this day, you're still seeing the use of bullet time style, slow motion shots. I mean, it had a big resurgence when Zack Snyder was at the top of his game. He did more of a ramping style, but that style of filmmaking changed action movies. And that's, again, why this has a legacy, because you have moments that you think this wouldn't exist because of The Matrix, or this exists because of The Matrix. Now, there's good and bad to this. I think Zack Snyder, as I mentioned, his ramping stuff looked really cool in 300. And then it got old once we were in The Watchmen, and definitely got old when he did the Sucker Punch movie, the time he actually wrote something himself. It has its time and it has its place. And I think slow motion got used to way too much, either for comedic purposes or for action sequences. And then it kind of like put this weird, and you could say that technically Blade started it, because Blade came out in 97 and he had the sunglasses and the trench coat. But they added this weird new look to action movies where they had to have like the weird sunglasses and the overcoat and the noir look, and it's got to be blue or it's got to be green tinted to everything they do. So there are negative things to The Matrix, of course. When something is this big and this popular and changes the way that we think about movies and action movies and sci-fi, sure, it's going to have bad things to it. But I think there's good more than anything else. And again, going back to my thing where after the dojo, the movie, this is when the movie turns into one of my favorite sci-fi movies and sci-fi action movies. I don't know if you could say that straight up it's my favorite sci-fi movie. That's a whole different episode for a different day. But the subway fighting, again, it adds to the beauty of this movie in the fight choreography. You just don't, and I'm sure there's movies out there. I mean, I haven't seen the most recent Mission Impossible, but I've heard there's good fight scenes in that. And there are still movies out there that have good hand-to-hand combat. I mean, if we're going to keep the theme of Keanu Reeves, John Wick has some awesome, weird gun kata action sequences where he's doing like MMA moves while shooting people. And I love John Wick. Don't get me started. I could do a whole podcast about that trilogy, which I just might, because the new one's just out and I have to see it. But this movie is truly special because it is very much a moment in time. It is very much a look at what it was like in the 90s to make a cyberpunk sci-fi action movie in that time period. But at the same time, it is still a breath of fresh air compared to what we have with action movies now. And I'm not saying I don't like current action movies. That's silly. You guys know how much I love superhero movies. I dedicated almost a whole month's worth of content to superheroes. So that's not the case. I just think there's a little bit of nuance lost in these movies because the focus is more on spectacle and the focus is more on CG and what can we put on screen? How many things can we put on screen instead of let's focus on these two people fighting. Let's pull the camera in tight and let's just focus on this. He's not fighting an army of people or things. It's just a one-on-one fight, sometimes two or three, but there's still that focus is in the center of those two having a brawl, which is one of the reasons I think the other two movies fail where this movie succeeds is they literally try to put as many Mr. Smiths as they could in that second movie. The fight after Neo meets the Oracle in The Matrix Reloaded, when he's in that park fighting the Mr. Smiths. And keep in mind, I watched this like a week ago. And even then, and as I was younger, I didn't think the singing went on long enough. I thought this is so great. This is so much fun to watch. But as I get older, now I know why the first movie is so much better than these other ones. Because while their fight scenes were a little bit longer than expected, there was always a tension that you didn't know what would happen with Neo. And by the second time he's fighting all these people, you know that Neo's the superhero. He is the one. So you know that there's no stakes. And it's the idea of, well, there's just thousands and thousands of thousands of these guys that he's going to hit. This fight's never going to end. And that fight goes on way too long. This movie, they knew that subtlety could work. And obviously it's going to be because of budget. But I think we need more subtlety in our action movies again. And I know that sounds insane because we're talking about a genre that usually has big buff dudes with machine guns and explosions and superheroes and all these things. I understand that, but I think what makes me love The Matrix, and again, we're going to go back to Keanu Reeves because he's just the man of the hour, I guess. You want to go back to the first Matrix and all those John Wick movies. Yes, the John Wick movies progress in spectacle, but in doing that, they still add tension, they still add stakes because he's still getting hit a lot. He's getting shot, he's getting stabbed, he's getting kicked. Like, there's still tension. And the first Matrix exceeded so well at making tension, and the agents are these daunting villains that are unsympathetic. They're not human. They are your Norton protection virus stuff, antivirus protection stuff. They're gonna clean out the computer of you, the virus. And there's just some this is why I wanted to do this episode because I had forgotten how much I appreciated the first Matrix movie. I don't hate the other two, but you can definitely see the dip in quality from the Matrix to the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix Revolutions. It's just simple facts. I know I'm not saying anything new on the internet. I just got to tell you, if there's still people out there that like the entire Matrix trilogy, good on you. But I'm not one of those people, and I know I'm not original in saying that, but it's just the truth. You know, I talked about how there's a legacy to this movie, and it's 20-year anniversary. It was one of the best sci-fi movies of the 20th century, in my opinion. So, I mean, it's hard for me to say what exactly is the legacy other than that statement. I think the legacy of The Matrix is the popularization of bullet time as a plot device. I mean, it doesn't entirely rely on bullet time, but it does play a factor into the movie, and they wrote it in there because it's The Matrix and they can change their rules and do whatever they want. So I think that's probably the legacy of it, and I also think it's, the idea that we can have more to our action movies where it's not just this person killed my wife or this person killed my family or some other, MacGuffin. There's a ticking time bomb or something like that, which, again, those have their place, and I don't dislike them. I still like movies like that. I mean, I keep comparing it to John Wick, but if you look at those John Wick movies, first movie is pretty basic. They kill his dog, and then he goes on a rampage. That's really all that movie is. So I'm not saying that, all movies need to be philosophical like The Matrix was. I'm saying that it was the legacy of that movie is that it was saying we can tell different stories. We can still have higher concept stories, mixed in with our kung fu movie, with our, action big spectacle movie. Just don't go too overboard with it. And unfortunately, they did in the other two movies. Well, what did you guys think of? What do you think is the legacy of The Matrix 20 years later? Am I right? Am I completely off? Do you even like The Matrix? I'm sure there's people out there. I know it's hard to believe. Even Ashley, who's against my action movie viewing, semi-liked it. I don't want to say she loved it, but, she enjoyed it. Still a fun movie to enjoy. Thank you so much for listening. You can follow us on social media, Loud and Opinionated on Facebook, at Loud Opinionated on Twitter, and at Loud Opinionated Brand on Instagram. I love doing these kind of episodes, and if you like them, get ready, because I'm doing the same exact thing next week, but for something entirely different. It's not a movie this time. Something entirely different than what I'm usually doing, but not really. So until next week, be loud and be proud.